In 2005, fear gripped the heart of Phoenix, Arizona. Along Baseline Road, a serial killer prowled, raping and killing 9 innocent victims. The city was in a frenzy, desperate for answers. Police arrested a construction worker named Mark Goudeau, branding him the Baseline Killer. But as the dust settled, doubts lingered. Was Goudeau truly the killer, or was there more to this dark tale? Here is his loving wife, Wendy, who fervently believes her husband is innocent.
Mark is completely innocent. I haven't seen anything that tells me Mark has committed these crimes, not personally or any of the police reports.
Are you ready for a riveting story? I am Joy Krause, and today we're about to embark on a journey through the extraordinary story of Wendy Goudeau, who found herself thrust into the spotlight as the wife of an accused serial killer. The police swore they had their man. And what did Wendy think about that?
I said, you know what? I said, that's bullshit.
The police told Wendy that Mark was guilty. She told them they were full of it. There's a possibility that Wendy may be right, because there seems to be a whole lot of BS being slung around in this case. The more I dug into the facts, the dirtier it seemed. So hold on tight, because you are going to have a front row seat in this episode of Killer Love Hacks, titled Communication Breakdown, Truth or Consequences. So what is the truth here? The untruth and the consequences. This story is jam-packed with nail-biting communication breakdowns and showdowns between Wendy, her man, and the cops. Do you wonder how a couple facing this type of drama could manage to keep their love going strong through it all? What are the secrets behind their unbreakable bond? And is it possible that we could pick up some tips for keeping our own love flames burning bright, even when things in our world get crazy? Get ready for a heart-pounding journey that'll take us from a little ranch house in a quiet Phoenix neighborhood to a cement cell on death row. So in this episode, we're focusing on a vital love hack: communication. Let's kick things off by taking a look at what happens when wires get crossed and signals get mixed up, aka miscommunication. Remember that classic scene in Cool Hand Luke when Paul Newman's character gets thrown down into a ravine because he was told, "What we have here is a failure to communicate"? Well, the only cool thing about Paul Newman getting thrown into that ditch was him looking back at us with those eyes. You know those blue eyes. But I digress. When there is a failure to communicate in real life, things can get seriously intense. Take Wendy and Mark Goudeau's situation, for example. Sometimes poor communication and misunderstandings have small consequences. But sometimes miscommunication can quickly spiral into deception. And in their case, it became a matter of life or death. It all began on a pleasant Saturday afternoon. Wendy was at the kitchen sink, washing dishes, stealing glances at her husband Mark in the backyard. Then suddenly, Mark vanished, and there was a knock on the door.
And then there's a knock on my door, and some of it's a little blurry for me, but I do remember, I think at that point I knew it was police, and I opened the door, and they seized, and they just kind of rushed me, and they were everywhere. They were all over the front yard, backyard, helicopters.
Mark was arrested and taken away in handcuffs. Wendy had no idea why he was being arrested until the following day when the Phoenix police held a big press conference. That's when they announced they had captured the baseline killer. Wendy was in shock.
Both of us were blown away. And Mark's a very strong person, but the first time we talked on the phone, we were both just crying. It was awful, you know, it's sad, and you don't know what to do, and you feel helpless. And we were both shedding tears. We were confused and overwhelmed, and how could this be happening?
Then Wendy heard they had collected Mark's DNA from one of the crime scenes. I spoke with a man from the community who prefers to stay anonymous about this DNA evidence, and here's what he said.
The reason people think the DNA evidence was tampered with was the DNA was swabbed with a Q-tip. This Q-tip went missing for about a year, and then mysteriously they found the Q-tip with this DNA evidence on it. So the question is, where was his evidence for nearly a year with DNA on it?
Could it be that authorities deliberately twisted the facts with questionable DNA evidence? Is it possible they manipulated the truth just to wrap up the case? And at what point does miscommunication turn into flat-out deception? As this investigation unfolded, doubts began to creep in about the authorities' actions. But you know what's even more unbelievable? The DNA drama was just the tip of the iceberg.
I gotta believe there are good cops out there who won't do this, but I think the detectives are especially, at least these detectives, they did whatever they had to do, you know, to make the arrest stick.
I asked Phoenix reporter Shayna Hogan, who covered this story exclusively, what she thought about the police investigation.
The city of Phoenix spent millions of dollars trying to catch the baseline killer. And, you know, at the same time, this one beat cop is following this guy named Terry Wayne Smith, and he is doing his own investigation. The baseline killer task force did not want this guy interfering, did not want this cop interfering with their investigation. They didn't want to say that this guy could be more likely because they just had an entire huge press conference saying we just caught the baseline killer. His name is Mark Goudeau.
All right. So we've seen how the authorities might have been playing with fire in Mark Goudeau's case. Speaking of something firing, do you remember the movie The Naked Gun and that classic scene where Lieutenant Frank Draben, played by Leslie Nielsen, said, "I'm sorry, I can't hear you, and don't fire the gun while you're talking"? In Frank Draben's world, miscommunication is funny. But in reality, it's no joke. Bad communication can lead to serious chaos or confusion and the possibility that an innocent man gets burned. So let's break it down, because communication has several parts: the good, the bad, and the ugliest of ugly. But for the good part, when communication is open and honest, it's a big, big win for the communicators and the communicatees. Basically, everyone, every time. Now let's circle back to Mark and Wendy Goudeau's story. On November 30th, 2011, a Phoenix jury sentenced Mark to death on the murder charges related to the Baseline Road killings. He is currently being held on death row at Arizona State Prison in Florence, Arizona, awaiting execution. But even as Mark awaits execution, his bond with Wendy remains unbreakable, strengthened by their ongoing communication. You know, I didn't even realize until I met Wendy that people on death row could make phone calls. So I asked her about this. How often do you and Mark communicate? And how do you communicate?
Well, we talk by phone and once a week. It's pretty limited on death row. And I visit him once a week as well, and through letters. And his letters might just say, I'm thinking of you, and I love you, and I'm so grateful for you. So, yeah, that's how we communicate.
You know, I got so involved in this case with Wendy and her family and Mark and reporters that it was really hard for me to stay non-biased and to keep an open mind about whether or not Mark was guilty. But I do know this much. There are a lot of unanswered questions and very shady communication. And there was a mad rush to lock someone up for these crimes. Man, can you imagine what Wendy is going through? Cops with rifles in her backyard, her husband dragged off to prison, trying desperately to uncover the truth. The deeper I dug into this case, the more convoluted it appeared. Was evidence being ignored, mishandled, destroyed, or maybe even completely made up? So many unanswered questions left hanging, both then and now. This is the reality Wendy Goudeau is facing. Picture this. On a calm Saturday afternoon, Wendy's peaceful life was shattered. Since that day, she's been battling for the man she loves, clinging to hope with all her might. She shared with me that there are moments when she feels like she's barely hanging on by a thread. In those moments, what does she do? She picks up the phone and calls her husband in prison. Or she writes him a letter. Or she visits him. They talk, they cry, and they navigate through this turmoil together. And they continue to fight, always talking about their hopes for the future.
So I have to tell you, when it gets really rough, I don't know really what gets you through something like this other than each other, quite honestly. What has happened here is wrong. And I could not live with myself if I just walked away from Mark and left him hanging. But I know he's innocent. And everybody has to have a cause, and I guess this is mine, and I will fight until he's home.
Talking, communicating. It's their lifeline. This story hits hard, doesn't it? It really does show us just how important communication is. There's the kind of communication that strengthens relationships, honest and clear. And then there's the kind that tears them apart, miscommunication, or, at its worst, deception. That's why this episode of Killer Love Hacks, titled Communication Breakdown, Truth or Consequences, took us right to death row for a stark comparison. You might be thinking this story is too extreme to relate to, right? I get that. But there's a reason this podcast uses extreme examples to drive home universal messages. In this case, it's about communication. Whether it's about romance, commitment, companionship, or any other relationship aspect, our goal is for these vivid stories to stick with you, carrying the message of each episode. Sometimes, like in this chapter, even discussing something seemingly innocent like miscommunication can have life or death consequences. So keep in mind that in life's journey, good communication isn't just coming along for the ride. It's our compass, steering our relationships towards smoother, more fulfilling connections. Well, here we are at the end of this journey. I'm Joy Krause, and I've loved having your company on this episode of Killer Love Hacks, titled Communication Breakdown, Truth or Consequences. But wait, you can read more about Wendy and Mark's story in my latest book, Killer Love Hacks, available on Amazon or our website, killerlovehacks.com. Inside, you'll discover behind-the-scenes stories of the fascinating people featured in our episodes, along with plenty of insights and practical tips about love, relationships, and mastering the art of navigating life. Remember when Joan Rivers used to say, "Can we talk?" Oh, well, I'd love to talk to you, and I am all ears. So if you've enjoyed today's stories, hit that subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. And if you're feeling generous, leave a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your feedback, and especially your company, mean everything to me. Well, so long for now. I can't wait to hang out with you again. So keep spreading the love, and I'll catch you on the flip side.